Have you ever been in one of those meetings, where like nobody is actually listening? Or maybe you gave a presentation and it just like fell flat even though you thought the material was good? Well, today we're going deep on this with How to Be Heard by Julian Treasure to figure out like what makes for powerful communication. And we're talking about both speaking and listening.
Yeah, it's interesting how much we overlook the impact of sound. And we focus so much on the visual, think branding, logos, all that.
Yeah.
But sound is kind of like the forgotten element. But it's actually really powerful stuff.
And that's exactly what Treasure gets into in this book. For anyone who doesn't know him, he's a sound consultant, and he's worked with like everyone from big corporations to the Dalai Lama, helping them understand how to use sound more effectively. And he starts by breaking down like the 4 ways sound affects us. Get this: physiologically, psychologically, cognitively, and behaviorally. And he's not just talking about music.
Right. It's all sound. Think about it. What happens when you hear like a sudden loud noise?
Come on, my heart starts racing.
Exactly. You get that like adrenaline rush.
Makes sense. It's like fight or flight kicking in.
Exactly. That's your body's physiological response to sound. It's primal, hardwired into us.
Okay, that makes sense. But how about psychologically? I mean, sure, music can evoke emotions, but what about other sounds?
Well, think about the sound of birdsong. Most people find it peaceful, right? Tranquil, maybe even a sense of safety.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's the psychological impact of sound, tapping into like deep-seated emotions and associations.
Interesting. So we've got our bodies reacting and our emotions swirling. What about the cognitive side of things?
This is where it gets really interesting. Our brains can only process so much sound at once. Have you ever tried to follow 2 conversations at once?
Oh, tell me about it. It's impossible.
Exactly. And this has big implications for like how we work and learn. Open plan offices, for example, can be incredibly distracting because our brains are constantly trying to filter out all the noise.
So that constant chatter is actually impacting our cognitive abilities.
It absolutely does. And then there's the behavioral impact of sound. Think about the music they play in fast food restaurants. It's usually upbeat, fast-paced.
Yeah, and it always feels like they're trying to rush you through your meal.
Precisely. The faster the tempo, the faster people tend to eat.
Right.
Which, increases table turnover for the restaurant. It's a subtle but powerful way that sound influences our behavior.
Wow. That's kind of creepy when you think about it. It's like we're being manipulated by sound all the time.
Well, I don't know if I'd say manipulation, but it does highlight the fact that we're constantly being influenced by sound, whether we're aware of it or not. And this brings us to one of Treasure's key points. True listening is becoming increasingly rare.
He actually calls it a lost art, especially in this age of technology. And he's not the only one who's noticed this. He references Sherry Turkle, who wrote Alone Together. You know that book about how technology is impacting human connection?
Oh yeah, Turkle's research is really fascinating and a bit alarming, to be honest. We're so plugged into our devices, constantly bombarded with information, that we're losing the ability to truly listen to each other.
Treasure goes even further, identifying what he calls the 7 deadly sins of speaking. Now, these aren't about morality, but rather habits that sabotage communication and erode trust.
He lists gossip, judging, negativity, complaining, excuses, exaggeration, and dogmatism.
Okay, so those are the sins, but what's the antidote? How do we become more powerful speakers?
Treasure proposes a framework he calls HAIL, which stands for honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love.
Love. I mean, I get honesty and integrity, but love.
Yeah, it might seem out of place, but think about it. When you approach communication with genuine care and a desire to understand, it changes the whole dynamic.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. So honesty is about being straightforward. Authenticity is being true to yourself. Integrity is keeping commitments and apologizing when you mess up. But what does love actually look like in communication?
It's about approaching conversations with good intentions, wanting the best for the other person, even if you disagree. It's about listening with empathy and speaking with kindness.
It sounds like it ties into this idea of creating a listening culture that Treasure talks about.
You're picking up on a crucial point there. It's not just about what we say, but how we behave. Our actions create a context for how others listen to us.
Can you give an example of that?
Treasure actually uses a really powerful example from the business world, the story of Gerald Ratner, a UK businessman.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Ratner made some jokes, kind of off the cuff, about his company's products being crap.
Ouch. I bet that didn't go over well.
It did not. Those seemingly harmless jokes led to a massive public backlash and ultimately the near collapse of his company.
That's a cautionary tale for sure. It really highlights how our words and actions can have unintended consequences. Speaking of consequences, I'm curious about Treasure's take on the voice itself. He goes into a lot of detail about the different elements of voice and how we can use them effectively.
He does. And it all starts with something most of us take for granted, our breath.
You know, I've never really thought about breathing techniques for speaking, but it makes sense. Singers train their breath, so why not speakers?
Exactly. Deep breathing from the diaphragm gives you more control over your voice. It allows you to project, modulate your tone, and speak for longer periods without strain.
So we should all be channeling our inner yogi and focusing on deep breaths.
It's a great place to start. And once you've got the breath down, you can start exploring your pitch.
This is where I get a little self-conscious. Is my voice too high, too low? Like, what's the ideal pitch?
Treasure talks about finding your optimal pitch. That's the pitch where your voice resonates most naturally and powerfully.
So how do you find that optimal pitch? You know, the one where your voice really shines?
Treasure recommends some vocal exercises like humming or singing scales.
Like warming up your vocal cords.
Exactly. You're basically exploring your range, finding the pitch where your voice feels strong and resonant.
So once you've found it, do you just try to speak from there all the time?
Not necessarily. You don't have to be overly conscious of it like in everyday conversation. But being aware of your optimal pitch can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Especially during presentations or, important conversations.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's about being strategic. What about intonation? Does that play a role too?
Absolutely. Intonation, or prosody as it's technically called, is all about how we vary our pitch to convey meaning and emotion. It's like adding punctuation to your speech. Think about how you'd say, "it's raining" versus "it's raining."
Oh yeah, total different vibe.
Right. The exclamation point adds emphasis, excitement, which is reflected in your intonation.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Like if you say "it's raining" in a flat voice, it's just information. But if you say it with excitement, "it's raining," that changes the whole message.
Precisely. And just like with pitch, you want to be aware of your intonation and use it strategically. Treasure also warns against falling into repetitive or forced prosodies like uptalk or vocal fry.
Oh yeah, uptalk, where your voice goes up at the end of every sentence.
That's the one. It can make you sound unsure of yourself.
Yeah, and vocal fry is that creaky, low sound.
Yeah, like that. Both of those habits can be really distracting.
So we've covered breath, pitch, and intonation. What else does Treasure have to say about the voice?
He also dives into timbre, which is the quality of your voice.
Timbre? What's that?
It's what makes your voice unique, like the difference between a violin and a cello.
So timbre is what makes my voice sound like, well, me.
Exactly. And while some aspects of timbre are inherent, Treasure says we can influence it through things like hydration, vocal health, even our emotional state.
So drinking plenty of water and avoiding things that strain your voice, like smoking or yelling, can actually improve the quality of your voice.
It can make a difference. After all, your voice is your instrument. And like any instrument, it needs proper care.
That's a great analogy. So we've got our instrument tuned up. What about volume?
Volume is important too. It's about finding the right volume for the situation. You don't want to be whispering so softly that nobody can hear you, but you also don't want to be shouting at people.
Right. It's about being respectful of your audience and the space. So how do you find that balance?
Treasure emphasizes being aware of your surroundings. If you're in a small room with a few people, you can speak more softly. But if you're addressing a large audience, you'll need to project your voice more.
That makes sense. And finally, there's pace. How do you know if you're speaking too quickly or too slowly?
You're right, it's a delicate balance. Speaking too quickly can make you sound nervous, but speaking too slowly can be boring. Treasure recommends varying your pace to keep the audience engaged. Slow down to emphasize key points, and speed up a bit during less critical parts.
So it's about keeping things interesting, mixing it up.
Exactly. Oh, and one more thing about pace. Don't forget about pauses.
Pauses.
Pauses can be incredibly powerful. They give your audience time to process, and they create anticipation. They also allow you to gather your thoughts.
I never thought about it that way.
Mastering the art of the pause can really take you from a good speaker to a great one.
So we've covered all these different elements of the voice: breath, pitch, intonation, timbre, volume, and pace. But how do we actually put all this into practice? How do we actually improve our voices?
Practice, practice, practice. Just like with any skill, record yourself speaking, listen back, Identify areas where you can improve, and don't be afraid to experiment. Try different techniques and see what works best for you.
So it's about becoming more self-aware.
Exactly. You're training your voice to be more powerful, more expressive, more engaging. If you're really serious about taking your speaking to the next level, Treasure even suggests working with a voice coach.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for powerful speaking, but what about listening? After all, communication is a two-way street.
You're absolutely right. And Treasure has a lot to say about listening, too. He argues that truly listening to others is one of the most powerful things you can do.
I agree. But it seems harder than ever these days, with all the distractions. So how do we become better listeners?
He offers a number of tips. One of the simplest is something he calls conscious listening. It's about making a deliberate effort to focus on the person speaking, to really hear what they're saying.
So it's about being present in the moment, giving the speaker your undivided attention.
Exactly. And it's not just about being quiet while the other person is talking. It's about actively engaging with what they're saying. Ask clarifying questions, reflect back what you've heard, summarize key points. All of these things show the speaker that you're truly listening.
It sounds like conscious listening is about creating a space where the other person feels heard and understood.
Precisely. And when you create that kind of listening space, something magical happens. People open up, they share more freely, they're more willing to be vulnerable.
It makes you think about all those missed opportunities, all those times we haven't truly listened.
It's a wake-up call for all of us. And it's not just about personal relationships. Conscious listening is crucial in the workplace, too.
Oh, absolutely. I can think of times when miscommunication or just not listening has caused problems at work.
It happens all the time. But here's the good news. Treasure says we can create a listening culture in our workplaces. It starts with leaders. When leaders are good listeners, it creates a ripple effect.
So it's about creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to share their ideas, to voice their concerns without feeling like they'll be ignored.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture of open communication and mutual respect. And it's not just about listening to your employees. It's about listening to your customers, your partners, your stakeholders, everyone you interact with.
It sounds like creating a culture of listening can really transform an organization.
It can be a game changer. And the best part is, it doesn't require some huge investment. It simply requires a shift in mindset and a commitment to making conscious listening a priority.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the power of sound, the decline of listening, the 7 deadly sins of speaking, the 4 cornerstones of powerful speaking, hail, and the importance of creating a culture of listening. What's next on our journey through how to be heard?
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll get practical. We'll delve into Treasure's advice on actually preparing for a talk, choosing a venue, managing technical requirements, rehearsing, warming up, even mastering stage presence.
Okay, let's get practical then. I do have a big presentation coming up, so I'm all ears.
Well, Treasure starts with something that, I don't know, I wouldn't consider. He starts with the venue itself.
Really? The venue? I always figured as long as there's a stage and a microphone, you're pretty much good to go.
Well, it's not quite that simple. You've put all this work into crafting your talk. You want a space that complements your message and enhances the audience experience.
So it's more than just the physical space. It's the vibe, the feeling.
Exactly. Treasure encourages you to think about the audience size. Is it going to be an intimate gathering or a packed auditorium?
Yeah, that makes sense.
How about seating? Rows or a more informal setup?
Okay, yeah.
Even the attitude of the venue staff matters.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, you want people who are helpful and supportive, not grumpy and dismissive.
Makes a big difference, right? Having a stage crew that's actually rooting for you.
Precisely. And once you've found the perfect venue, it's time to think about those technical requirements.
Yeah, right. Microphones, projectors, sound systems, all the stuff that can make or break your talk.
I've been in so many presentations where the tech just fails and it throws everything off.
It's a nightmare.
Treasure stresses clear communication with the organizers, specifying your needs well in advance. Don't assume anything.
Right.
And he even recommends arriving early for a sound check and a vision check.
Always better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. You don't want to lose your audience before you even begin because of a technical glitch.
Yeah. Speaking of preparation, what about rehearsal? Do you rehearse? I know some people just wing it, but I'm guessing Treasure's not a fan of that.
Oh, he's not a fan of winging it. He's a firm believer in the power of rehearsal and actually practicing out loud. not just like reading your notes silently.
Yeah, like running a play before opening night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to work out the kinks, make sure the transitions are smooth.
Find your rhythm.
Rehearsing helps you refine your timing, your delivery, the flow of your talk. It helps make sure it sounds natural, not like stiff and memorized.
Yeah, for sure. And even with all that prep, I imagine there are still those pre-talk jitters. Do you have any tips for those butterflies?
Treasure's got a whole section on that. He emphasizes the importance of warming up, both vocally and physically.
So it's not just about your voice, but your whole body.
Your whole body. It's about feeling confident, energized, ready to, own the stage. He provides a series of exercises to loosen up your body, get your blood flowing, release any tension.
So it's like an athlete prepping for a big game.
Exactly. You got to warm up those muscles, get your head in the game.
Love it.
And once you're warmed up, then it's time for Treasure's BES technique.
Oh, yeah, right. BES. Breath, eyes, space, stance. Give me a refresher.
It all starts with breath. Take a deep, calming breath before you start speaking. It centers you, calms your nerves.
Okay.
Then, eye contact. Crucial for connecting with your audience, gauging their reactions, and keeping them engaged.
So don't just stare at your notes or the floor.
No staring. Make eye contact, connect with people.
Right, let them know you see them.
Next, space. Use the stage to your advantage, move around, use gestures, keep the audience visually engaged.
On the stage.
Exactly. And finally, stance. Stand tall, shoulders back, project confidence.
It's like that saying, stand tall and own your space.
Exactly. Command attention. Let them know you're in control.
I like that. Treasure really has thought of everything. This book is a treasure trove, for sure.
It is.
I feel like I've learned so much about the power of speaking and listening. And it's not just about giving big speeches. It's about all those everyday conversations, too.
You got it. Whether you're giving a presentation at work or having a tough conversation with a loved one or just like trying to connect with someone new.
The ability to communicate effectively is essential.
It really is.
It's about being more mindful, more aware of how we use our voices and how we listen.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into how to be heard. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that you can use to become a more powerful communicator.
Until next time, keep listening, keep speaking, and keep making your voices heard. We'll see you on the next deep dive.